Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give people a minute or two to log on, and then we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, AI and HR, Top 5 Risks and Opportunities. We're recording today's session and we'll share it with you following the webinar. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom panel. Now, I'd like to hand it over to our moderator for today's session, HR Acuity CEO, Deb Muller.
Thanks, Lexi. Hi, everyone. I see everybody's sort of telling us where they're calling in from or dialing in from. I don't know what we do. We zoom in from, I guess, is the language we should be using now. But it's like everybody's from all over, and I know this is a great topic of interest. A lot of people joining, but we're going to get started because we have a lot of content to get through as well. So I'm going to do a little bit of an overview, some welcomes and introductions, and then hand it over to our two facilitators today that we're really excited we have with us. I'll get to that in a second. So Lexi, why don't you just run to the next slide? Okay, so maybe you don't know about HR Acuity, but we are a technology company. We are the leading provider of employer relations and investigations case management. And we like to say that we help organizations manage things from intake all the way through aftercare with really deep analytics. So instead of just tracking issues, you can help use data to inform what happens next in your organization. So if you want to learn more about our platform, and I'm not going to talk about it today, but if you want to learn more about what we're doing and the exciting things that we're doing with AI, which is relevant to this conversation, please reach out to us and we'd love to take you on a curiosity tour. And we welcome all of our customers. I see some of them logging in here today as well. So thanks for joining us. Next slide. Okay, a little bit more about HR Acuity. Yes, we are a technology company, but we're really proud of the employee relations community that we built over the past decade plus together. The first thing is our benchmark study, and I'm excited to say that we actually just launched today our 9th annual employee relations benchmark study. Lexi's going to put all the links in the chat, but if you have not gone to our website and downloaded it, or actually this year you can read it all right online, go. I mean, don't go now. After the hour's over, you'll go and look through it, download it. It is chock full of great information, some new insights, some things about AI. I'm going to go through in just a second. So please do that. And if you're interested in participating next year, our 10th annual, we want to make it bigger than ever, although this year it does cover about 9 million employees. Let us know if your organization has more than 1,000 employees. We also have our Empower Network. It's our employee relations online community. It is free. There's an app. You can do it online. If you're in employee relations, if you do anything related to employee relations, you should join, have your team join. It's a great community. I believe there's close to 7,500 members right now, all levels, from all over the world, on live feeds talking about what's going on, what questions they have, collaborating. There's small groups to talk about specific topics like labor, to talk about global issues. It's really, you have to be there. So make sure you go there. We also have our ERQ, which is our employee relations quotient. It is our ER maturity model. Go on our website, take it, see where you can go, get some insights as to how you can move along the maturity for your organization in ER. And finally, if you are a employee relations leader at an enterprise organization, we'd love for you to join us at our roundtable. I think it's our 9th or 10th year doing that as well. It's an annual in-person event of global ER leaders. We get together, we collaborate, we really start defining the future of employee relations. So if you want to be part of that, it's a very unique opportunity. That is going to be in October. Our website gives you all the information. It's in Boston this year. We'd love to have you join us. All right, next slide. Important dates. I talked about the benchmark. It is out now. Other things happening this month. We have another webinar coming out about the benchmark. So I'm going to go into more detail with our partner, our research partner, ISRIS. We're going to talk about the results. So mark your calendar for that on June 24th. June 25th, We're going to have an Empower discussion. So different from the webinars, if you're in Empower, we have ER professionals that lead these discussions. So, now we're going to hear about AI and ER, what to look out for, the risks. This is when we talk about it. What are we doing? How are we experimenting? What's really happening in our companies and helping each other through this new phase of how we do work. And then again, I mentioned the roundtable. We hope that you can enjoy it. You can join us, and that's October 28th and 29th. Again, we will make sure you have all these links. Next slide. Okay, my favorite slide, for those of you that have attended a webinar, as a thank you to our presenters, we like to make a donation for their time and for all of you for joining us. And we ask them to, choose if there's an organization that's meaningful for them or one that's in line with our mission and vision. And so we're so excited today to be making a donation to the Just in Time for Youth, Foster Youth nonprofits in San Diego. I mean, I can't think of an organization that is more important to help children that are in the system. And this looks like they do it when they get out of the system, transitioning out. And I mean, a wonderful organization, and we're so proud to be able to make a donation. So thank you for coming, and thank you to Eli and Oliver for sharing your expertise so that we can go ahead and make this donation. Okay, so I'm going to do a little starting, and this is a little sneak preview of what's in that benchmark study, because of course we asked about AI in there, and maybe not a big shocker. It's the buzz. When it comes to employer relations, it is still early days. Nearly half of organizations that we surveyed in this say that their use of AI is non-existent, and only about a third are experimenting or piloting. And it sort of makes sense, and that's why we're having this conversation today. deals with incredibly sensitive and complex issues, so legal, ethical, and compliance concerns are real. And I think it's causing organizations to move more cautiously. We're going to talk about that today, because just because we have to be cautious doesn't mean we can't use AI. It doesn't mean there aren't applications. We're excited about it at HR Acuity. There's real opportunity, but we have to be intentional and responsible. So, I think this shows you don't feel bad if you're sort of behind the eight curve. You're going to eight ball. You're going to get there, and we're gonna help you do that in the way that actually supports what we're doing. It doesn't eliminate what we're doing, but it really supports and makes us better as employee relations professionals and investigators. Interestingly, we also asked, if you can just move to the next slide, we asked last year about interest in AI. So we started talking about it. You can see here the top interests were things like uncovering trends, analyzing case data, improving workflows. Over 75% respondents said they were interested in these areas. So fast forward to this year, not a lot has changed, right? Only 28% are using AI for writing assistance, with much smaller numbers with things like policy recommendations, case transcription, and analysis. So I think that's part of the conversation today. People want to use it, but we need to make sure if we unlock the benefits, we're doing so responsibly. There's guardrails. They enhance, not replace the human work of ER. And this is just so relevant to today's conversation. So this and more in the benchmark study. So download that after the session. But for now, I do want to introduce our presenters and really thank them for being here. So we have two great guest speakers that are going to share with us their wisdom on this. We have Eli Makis. He is the managing partner of Vander Makis Law Corporation. It's a preeminent investigations firm with attorneys across California and Arizona. They are devoted to promoting fair workplaces and safe campuses through industry-leading neutral fact-finding services. Drawing upon his extensive employment law background, Eli conducts complex and sensitive investigations involving a variety of workplace complaints for public and private employers throughout California. And if you can handle California, you can handle anything else. It's a country in and of itself. Eli regularly trains on employment law topics, including training internal and external investigators on how to conduct impartial workplace investigations. And he is the immediate past president of the Association of Workplace Investigators Board of Directors, and regularly serves on the faculty of AWI's ANAB Accredited Training Institute. So thank you, Eli, for joining us. And Oliver McKinstry is the Vice President, Associate General Counsel of Labor, Employment, and Investigations at DaVita, a Fortune 200 kidney care company. He leads DaVita's labor and employment law and HR compliance teams. And in his role, Oliver oversees all of DaVita's labor and employment advice and litigation, including wage and hour and union-related matters. He also leads a team of lawyers and HR professionals focused on workplace investigations, employee relations, HR policies, personnel files, and license and certification requirements. Since joining DaVita in 2016, Oliver has helped streamline the investigation process, implement a process for addressing threats of workplace violence, standardize investigation reports, and implement artificial intelligence to help with the intake process and draft corrective actions. Oliver is currently the vice president of the Association of Workplace Investigators and will become president in November 2025. Congratulations. So, welcome both of you, and looking forward to an awesome conversation. We encourage people to ask conversations in the chat. We're going to monitor that, or if you prefer to do it anonymously, there is a Q&A option as well. And we're going to try to fit in your comments and questions in between where it makes sense, but I know we have a lot of content to cover. So thanks for joining us, Eli and Oliver.
Great. Thank you so much, Deb. We're so excited to be here. This is a topic that Oliver and I have both talked a lot about and presented on before, and one we think is just particularly pertinent and relevant to the experience of being a human resources professional right now. I wanted to mention one more thing about our firm. So our firm, which is based in California and Arizona, we focus on conducting workplace investigations when employers hire us to do that. But we also recognize that most investigations should be conducted by well-trained internal HR professionals. And so we have a separate training company called VM Mastered, which is dedicated to creating customized training programs for internal HR professionals who are conducting workplace investigations. And in those conversations, AI continues to be a big topic, and so we're excited to address it today. With that, I'll turn it over to Oliver, and Oliver's going to kick us off.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Deb, for the intros, and thanks, Eli, for passing it over. I'm very happy to be here. I call myself a recovering lawyer, although I am a practicing lawyer and help DaVita with our legal practice. I think my heart is in HR, and so I identify first as an HR professional, an investigator, and an employee relations professional. So hopefully some of what I'm going to talk through will you'll feel a little bit of kinship with me and what we're going through at this time with AI and what to do in the HR profession. So let's move to the next slide. Eli and I today wanted to really dive into AI from the perspective of general HR and look at it with an eye toward where are our greatest opportunities and maybe where are greatest risks. And so what we're going to talk about is the top 5 risks and top 5 opportunities for AI in HR. I think Deb mentioned a little bit of research on AI in the employee relations space. Let's take a little bit of a broader look at some research just in the HR space in general. Eli and I looked into some of this, and it turns out a large majority of people in the workplace are already using AI. Over half of employees and probably over half of you in attendance are already using AI somehow in your daily work. And I think it's really interesting to think about the ways different generations use AI in the workplace. The research indicates that older employees are really using AI and specifically ChatGPT more as a search engine, something like Google, where they can type in some kind of prompt and get an answer. Whereas 20-somethings and those kind of just older than 20-somethings tend to use it more as a life advisor. And I identify with that age group. And I will admit that I often use AI to help me plan my travel, where to go, what to see, what to eat. So I think I fall into that category. And it turns out college students are actually using it basically as an operating system. It's doing many different functions for them. They really have adopted it very thoroughly. So interesting to start from the place of many people are already using AI in the workplace. I think it's important to think about why they're doing that. And the first main reason that comes from the research, most people are saying, is efficiency. Try and do things in a more streamlined way and save time by doing that. Certainly one of the reasons I have it make my travel plans, so that makes sense to me. Another top reason is just simply access to information. Trying to find information that we think is out there, but maybe we don't know where to get it, having AI go and do that for us. The next one is just innovating, coming up with some kind of new process or approach to things. That is another function that AI can do for us. And then the last one is improving our work quality. And people are already doing that using AI to try and improve their work quality. So probably not a lot of surprises here, and I think many of the opportunities we're going to discuss will certainly hit on these use cases for AI in HR, and then we'll talk about some of the risks with that too. So a couple of the maybe challenging components of using AI in the workplace, of course, data sensitivity is one of them. And the research that we reviewed shows that a lot of people are using AI in a way that they actually are uploading sensitive company or customer information into public generative AI tools. And that is a big challenge with these tools is once you upload your information, you may lose control over it and you don't know how it's being used. And unfortunately, it looks like a lot of the workforce is already out there doing that. I hope that's not anyone on the call today, but that's going on. So that's something we should be aware of. Also, a large majority of people have relied on AI output without actually critically evaluating the results. And I think Deb mentioned this previously. It is essential to maintain the human judgment component, even when we're using AI. But as you can see in this data, that is already a challenge that people are not using their critical thinking when using these tools. And then last here on this slide, people are making mistakes when they rely on AI tools. And I think in the legal profession, we've seen this in some filings in court where lawyers are using AI to come up with some case law citations, and the AI is hallucinating cases that actually don't exist. Those have ended up in briefs that have been filed with the court. And it turns out judges actually read the briefs that lawyers file, and they have figured out that those citations don't exist, and lawyers have been sanctioned. And I think it's just a good example of a profession where we think people are very careful with the things that they file. But when relying on AI, you really have to double check the results that it's giving you before using them.
Thanks, Oliver. And before we really jump deep into the opportunities and risks that we see around artificial intelligence, we think it's worth just level setting on what it is that makes this such a unique and tantalizing and also challenging technology to adopt, to understand, and why the nature of the technology itself makes it particularly concerning in an HR context, given the type of work that we do. So I want you to think about this distinction between deterministic versus probabilistic technology. And I'll break it down with this example. If you think about using a calculator, if you enter 6 times 8 into any calculator, anywhere, at any time, you're always going to get 48 as the answer. You're never going to get an answer that says, well, 51% of the time it's 48, but 32% of the time it may be 23, and 1 or 2% of the time it could be 5. It's always going to give you the same output. And that's what we're used to when we're talking about existing technology. When we use a computer, we expect that if we type deterministic into Word, we are always going to get deterministic output through our keyboard. So the technology that we're used to is based on predetermined conclusions. We know we're always going to get the same answer and the same output based on the context or the information we provide to it. But artificial intelligence is actually very different. It's probabilistic technology. The interesting thing about this is this is actually how people think. People are probabilistic technology. If you give us a bunch of information and you ask us for an answer, we're going to weigh that information, and based on our experience and our knowledge and everything we've learned over the course of our lifetime, we're going to give you our best estimate or best guess on what the right answer is to your question based on our experience and knowledge, but it's just a probabilistic outcome. It's our best guess based on what we know. And that's how generative artificial intelligence works as well. The decisions or the outputs that you receive from an AI tool are based on the tool's best estimate of the answer as it goes out and looks at all of the data that it's been trained on. So this means that output can be pretty inconsistent under the same conditions. And my guess is many of you have experienced this, where you put a question into an AI tool at 3 o'clock and you get one answer, and then at 3:05 you put the same question in and you get a slightly different answer. And maybe they're both good answers, but they're different. And I think this is one of the things that's most confounding and both creates opportunities, but also obviously flags significant risks around using artificial intelligence. So I want you to think about that distinction between deterministic and probabilistic technology as we talk through some of these opportunities and risks. I also want to highlight another challenge with AI is just the variations in how it's used. Oliver already touched on how generational differences impact different ways of using or thinking about artificial intelligence. But there are other factors too. There are socioeconomic differences. Much of the writing on AI talks about the concern around whether different socioeconomic communities will have the same access to AI and whether they'll have the same education and training and understanding of the risks of it. So that's a significant factor we have to consider as well. Then there's just organizational differences. My guess is that there are some folks on this webinar who work in an organization where the organization has said, absolutely not, under no circumstances may you use AI in the execution of your work duties. I know that there are large law firms who have taken that approach, even though AI has a lot of potential in the legal field. So there's just going to be different experiences for organizations and how to navigate AI. And then there's just individual comfort. Some people are going to be more comfortable using the technology, others less so. And bringing a whole organization up to a common level of experience and utilizing AI in a function like human resources is going to be pretty challenging. The reality is too, there's a lack of clear direction on best practices for using AI in human resources. And I think that's what's really amazing about the Empower community and that discussion that's coming up later, I think in June, I think it was, is just the opportunity to sit and discuss with your colleagues, how are you actually using this in a safe place where you can talk about the challenges and the pitfalls in doing so. So continue that dialogue, because that's ultimately going to be how we come up with what the best practices are. So with that, why don't we jump into our top 5 opportunities?
Yeah, great. Hopefully that is thought-provoking already. Starting out with one of the most significant opportunities for AI in my mind is really using AI as kind of an HR generalist type function. If you're anything like me, you probably spend a lot of your day or your time really pointing people in the right direction. That may be just telling someone where to find a specific policy. Maybe it's a travel policy. Maybe it's connecting someone to your internal leave of absence team or the external provider that you have for that. Maybe it's just contact information that you're providing. But I think a lot of HR generalists, a lot of HR people spend time really just connecting employees with the right resource. But all of that information usually exists in policy documents or practice one-pagers that AI tools can really easily digest and learn. And then a valuable way to use AI is to have your employees go to this type of AI agent and ask those questions to the AI agent, whether that's a bot or some other kind of tool. And it can just simply guide them to those resources based on the policy documents that it has access to or the practices that you've trained it on. And in doing so, think of how much time that might take off of your plate or your HR generalist plate. So I think of this as a really great opportunity to create those efficiencies that we talked about that people are looking for with AI. By really helping that HR generalist function. Often it's the more junior folks in HR who are doing those things, but can really create efficiencies for them and do some of those simpler functions that they spend time on. Eli,
And
anything you'd add there?
well, I think, as we talk through these opportunities, there's always another side to that too, which is there probably are some challenges or risks around delegating this responsibility to an AR assistant, an AI assistant as well, right? So I can imagine concerns around accuracy might be something that one would be concerned about. Is that fair?
Oh, for sure. If you're anything like companies I've worked for, sometimes you have multiple policy documents, or you even have some conflicting practices depending on an organization, or maybe it's just you've had several iterations of the same policy. So it's possible that the AI might not get the accurate answer. Maybe it goes to the wrong document, or can't compile all of the documents to come up with something. So I think that's a realistic challenge with this approach. You have to be careful about the inputs so you get the right output.
And I want to address Paula's question in the chat here, and I want to just sort of acknowledge one of the more challenging aspects of a webinar like this. And I'm afraid that we're going to do the same thing that you've probably heard in other webinars. We're going to talk a lot about what AI can do, what some of the risks are, but we're not going to give you any guidance on what tools you should actually explore or adopt, or identify even what specific tools are worth evaluating. And that's largely because there are so many different tools and they're at such an early stage that it's virtually impossible to make that kind of a recommendation. Well, I think what our goal is that you take away from this discussion what the potential is, so that as you are going out in a more systematic process in your organization and beginning to evaluate tools, you have some framework for questions and how to evaluate what might be an appropriate tool for your organization. And so, Paula, to your question, how does this work? And I'm no technologist, but from a technical perspective, basically, current AI tools are already trained on, their large language models are already trained on large volumes of data. And so a lot of what the new AI tools are doing is they have an LLM as a foundation for the tool, and then they are developing specific agents which have a specific purpose. An agent is a technical term that describes basically a plug-in to the AI tool that goes out and, for example, in this scenario, it would go out and it would look at what your policies are, which would be uploaded into the tool, and it would evaluate based on its best guess, considering all the data it's been trained on. It would evaluate, looking at your policies, what the best answer is to the prompt that was given. So this is a really good question, and one that, as you're evaluating products that are promising that they can do all sorts of amazing things in the HR space, you really want to make sure that the vendor understands the answer to questions like this and can explain to you how it's going to work and how you're going to avoid errors, for example, or inaccuracies or hallucinations. So with that, why don't we move on to another opportunity? And with all of these, it's a double-edged sword, right? But I think one area that AI certainly has potential for is summarizing and triaging conversations that occur in the HR space. In our experience, in the tools that we've experimented with, and I should just acknowledge one thing. In our law firm, we've decided to develop our own tool. So we're working on a customized tool that is unique to our firm, to workplace investigations, the way we do them. And so a lot of our experimentation has come through use of that tool. And we found, for example, that AI-supported transcription is really quite accurate. And so one tool, one function that AI does pretty well is transcribing or creating a transcript of a conversation. It could be transcripts of a hotline complaint. It could be transcripts of an intake call that you have with somebody who's raising an employee relations concern. And once it does that first step of transcribing the call or the interaction, an AI tool can begin summarizing or triaging the key elements or proposing next steps based on what the issues were that were raised in that conversation. So this can reduce the note-taking burden. I know that there are some HR departments where they will have 2 people in every meeting, which may still be a good practice, but the purpose of one of those individuals is to take notes or to try to take verbatim notes while the other person is carrying on the conversation. And this tool would help lift that burden. Any thoughts, Oliver, from your perspective on this opportunity?
Well, I love the sound of it. I have struggled to take notes accurately in many an interview, and had to go back and interpret them. And so I really do see this as an opportunity. But one of my big concerns is just the accuracy component. of this tool. And I think that's really important to analyze, because I think for those of us who have done investigations or in employee relations, sometimes it's just not so cut and dry. Someone may say something to you that is coded or may not even be clear in the words that they're using, but you pick up on the fact that there is a bigger issue and you need to dive into it. And I think some of that doesn't always come across in a transcript that you get. And so it is important that you are reviewing transcripts, even when you use a tool like this, to make sure that the context is included and that what is coming across in the transcript makes sense and is accurate. And unfortunately, I think that means it's maybe not always as efficient as we want, because if you have to go back and review it all, that takes time too. So I think some concerns with using a tool like this, but I am hopeful that there is improvement and this just continues to get better and better, because I do think it could be an efficiency save.
Yeah, Oliver, I'm just going to add to that as well. It can work, but I mean, you need to review it like right after you have the conversation too, right? I know in interviews, they're sort of in my head. I can hear that person talking and emphasizing things, but sometimes transcriptions you'll go back a week later and you'll be like, what were they talking about with the owl and the pink purple suitcase? You know what I mean? Like, or someone asked here about sort of accents and whether they picked up something. And if you were to go back right after and look at it and review it and sort of make changes and say, no, that's not what they said, or here's the context, it could be helpful. But, we know ER people are really busy. They're moving from one thing to another and they're humans. And so will they do that? And that is a concern.
Yeah, and Deb, there's a concept called verification drift that some researchers around AI have talked about, which is a recognition that AI can be effective so long as you're doing what you just described, which is reviewing it really carefully. But there's this recognition, sort of a psychological recognition, that people tend to begin to rely more and more on the output of the tool because a lot of it seems accurate, seems good. Referencing back to the attorneys, I am an attorney, and referencing back to the attorneys Oliver mentioned who have submitted case law that was not actually real, they're not bad lawyers. They relied too heavily on the tool before submitting their briefs. And that's something as HR professionals we have to be really careful about. I want to just address quickly June's question here about discovery of transcription. And that's an issue that I can certainly see coming up, which is if you use a transcript in your investigation and that matter is subsequently litigated, and you have to produce that transcript and explain how it was created. We have not seen that yet at all at such early stage in the use of this technology, but it is something that we're talking with our investigations team about, is how do we make sure that we have an explanation of how we used AI technology in our investigations, and what are our answers going to be when a plaintiff's attorney challenges us or disputes what we are said or what conclusions we found. And I think that's something we'll have to address with a transcription piece of it too. And to Katrina's comment about AI in other languages, I do believe that AI transcription is pretty effective in other languages, so long as the tool is fine-tuned for that. But background noise or folks who have an accent, that can impact the quality. So it goes back to what Oliver said, which is you have to be vigilant about double checking this. Back to you, Oliver.
Yeah, thanks. I'll stay kind of off the top here on this one. Please, I recommend working with your employment counsel, your lawyer, your in-house counsel on some of these topics, especially if you're talking about discovery. They'll likely have opinions about that, so make sure to check with them too. And I think benefits is another topic that comes up as an opportunity, but you wouldn't want to explore without consulting your internal counsel too. I have benefits on this list because with benefits comes a lot of data. This is a very data-rich area for those of us who provide benefits to our employees, which I think is probably most people on the call. It comes along with a lot of data. That's both data of who's using the benefits, how often they're using the benefits, once they register, do they continue using them? But also the the vendors that we use collect a lot of information from our employees in providing those benefits. Think about health benefits, the conditions that employees have, and how often they're seeing providers because of those. It's a very data-rich environment around benefits, and that means it's an opportunity where AI can help us with some of the things we need to do. And that could be maybe personalizing some of the offerings that we have to our employees, helping them navigate what can be very tricky benefits by making suggestions based on demographics. People who have similar demographics use these benefits in the past, so maybe they would be interesting or useful to this type of employee. Another way that this could be helpful is just tracking and determining what benefits are most used. We often do that just based on registration, but we don't always know after registration how the benefits are being used, how thoroughly. And so analyzing that data, having some AI help can help understand how useful our benefits are and whether you want to continue them. And the last would just be costing, predicting the costs based on the data that you have and helping you better understand your costs. So some benefits there potentially from AI in the benefits space.
Our next opportunity is certainly close to my experience, which is around employee relations and investigations. And I think this is a challenging opportunity because it's so wide ranging. Like there are so many different things or ways that an AI tool could be incorporated or relied upon in the employee relations space, and specifically in the context of investigations. What I hear a lot of people talking about when they think about using AI in investigations, and this is something that we've talked with Deb about too, is everybody says, oh, well, I want to use it to summarize my interview notes, or I want to use it to summarize evidence. And as we've already alluded to, there are some real risks around that. And so I want to focus our attention rather on some other skills that AI can do pretty effectively in the context of investigations. One of the ways that we found our AI tool to be particularly effective is just vetting or querying the evidence we've gathered. So we might want to say how many witnesses talked about this meeting on June 3rd, and you can upload, in our case, we upload transcripts from interviews that we've conducted and emails that we've gathered, and the tool is pretty effective at going out and searching which employees referenced or talked about that meeting on June 2nd. Another way that we've experimented with it is saying, okay, well, how many witnesses corroborated that John made a comment about age in that meeting on June 2nd. And the tool is pretty effective at going out and identifying where in the evidence and which witnesses made these particular comments or can corroborate that they heard John make that comment, for example. So querying evidence and querying information you've gathered during an investigation is a skill that an AI tool does pretty effectively. And it doesn't have some of the risks that delegating the full responsibility for summarizing a witness interview has. The reason that we're concerned generally about the idea of summarizing a whole witness interview with AI is that if you go and tell the tool, go summarize Sally's complaint, if that's all the information you've given it, the tool is going to come back with radically different responses on 3 different occasions that you give it that direction. So the point is, if you think back to what I said earlier about probabilistic technology, it's making its best estimate based on the information you've given it as the user or the prompter, and based on the volumes of data that it's been trained on. So if you want a better summarization, or you want a better output on a summary, for example, of Sarah's complaint, you have to, as the user, provide a really detailed, narrow context or prompt about what specific information you want the tool to summarize. So that's one of the challenges that you have to think about. Another skill that we found it to be pretty effective about in the context of investigations is identifying witnesses who you might want to interview, or identifying documents that you might want to gather, identifying the potential scope of the investigation. You can upload the complaint, for example, and it does a pretty good job of identifying the scope. If you include your policy, it can identify what policies it might be in, the conduct might violate. It can also propose questions that you should be considering during the investigation. So one way to think about an AI tool in this context is sort of like an eager associate investigator, super smart, really eager to help and support you, but actually has no understanding of the investigation process without you providing it lots of information and training. So those are a couple thoughts where I think there's an opportunity there, but as with everything, there's some risk around it. Deb, what are your thoughts on that? And you're on mute.
Thanks. Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on this, but I agree with everything you said. I think the problem with a summary by definition is sort of taking something and condensing it. And as you said, it's deciding what's important and what's not. You can assume that AI bot has never worked in a plant, has maybe never done a sales job. So those little things that actually, being in your organization or just, being an outside investigator, knowing enough to ask those questions may get glossed over or may get eliminated. I'll never forget, I had, this was not AI, it was years ago, but I had someone take notes for me and they weren't a very good note taker. And there was one thing that the person said that afterwards I was like, oh my God, could you believe they're like, and I went to their notes, they didn't even mark it down because to them that was not relevant. To me, it was very short of a smoking gun. So, because I was thinking about the connection, everything like that. So I think I love, and that's some of the things, not to, give away things that we're doing in HR Acuity because we know there's ways to assist the investigator. Make sure you scope it well. You do a comprehensive investigation, which we know is one of the things that as an investigator you need to do to make sure it's compliant. And that's exciting.
Oliver, I want to ask you a question in this in the context of employee relations and investigations with AI, because I think one of the sort of the devil's the devil's in the details issues here is the risk of delegating authority for an investigation or for an employee relations decision. Oliver, how would you evaluate that risk?
Oh, I would say it's high. I would not want to delegate authority. And for some of the reasons that you all mentioned, I think it's really important to have that human decision-making point all through the investigation. So I think AI can help the human make decisions. And I think, Eli, you raise a great point about how a human can use AI to be more prepared to make a better decision by querying the evidence that exists in the tool. But I really think that it should be the investigator who uses their critical thinking to make judgments throughout the investigation and certainly to make the ultimate finding. There are so many things that go into that. I don't think that AI is sophisticated and advanced enough yet to be delegating that to. And that's a good thing for our profession. We're still necessary as humans, HR professionals, investigators to do that. I think one of my other concerns is some of the things you're saying AI can do. That's how I train people on investigations and employee relations. Deb mentions having someone take notes and then kind of issue spot. Well, that's how I learned, and I assume that's how a lot of people learn how to really understand what's important when you're talking to people and how it plays into the bigger picture in an investigation. So if you're having AI do that, do we miss a generation of investigators? I think that's incumbent upon us as leaders to think through if we use AI in this way, how are we going to train the next generation? I don't have an answer to that, but it's definitely on my mind.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Go ahead, Deb.
The other opportunity or the issue is just bias, right? We know AI is inherently biased. And what have we been trying to do for years and decades is take bias out of the investigation process. So now you're layering something on that's known to have that problem. So also a big concern, obviously.
For sure.
Great point. Well, why don't we talk about our last opportunity, which Oliver, I hope there are no risks with this one. I hope we can just start using it immediately to do this.
Yeah, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. This one is complicated, but a lot of employers have data when it comes to performance, and especially in retail healthcare space, things that are important to us include time and attendance and productivity. And those are both very data-rich environments, and AI can help us there compile how people are living up to their time and attendance requirements and how productive they're being, and then put that into a nice little package for a leader on their each individual employee. I'm sure you've all heard these. It's hard to write PDRs. It's time consuming, and so this is an area where AI may be able to help. However, it is a very risky area, and performance is something where context matters, and the human decision-making discretion is very important. So I list this here with the caveat that you got to be very careful.
Yeah, it sounds like a tremendous opportunity, and I know that there are going to be tools that are fine-tuned to help with this. But it also sounds like, as with many of the opportunities we're talking about, the importance of human judgment and making sure that the human is still the decision maker, is still the one driving the analysis, and is only using the tool to the extent that it can be helpful in gathering or summarizing or collecting information, but ultimately the user has to be the one who's driving this, right?
Yep, totally agree.
Well, that probably felt like 5 opportunities with a lot of risks. Now we're going to talk about 5 risks that also have some opportunities. And I think that's the challenge with this topic, but it's also the thing that makes it kind of exciting. So why don't we move on to the first risk, which is using AI to make employment decisions. Now, this obviously is a significant area of risk because, as we've talked about, and I see some of the comments in the chat even expressing some concern around delegating too much responsibility to AI, and certainly relying on the tool to make an employment decision, which that might look like saying, okay, here's the investigation report. What should the action be? Well, that would be an inappropriate delegation of authority. The HR professional simply has to be the one who's evaluating past practice, has to be the one who's evaluating the impact and relevance of the evidence that was gathered, the findings that were made in the investigation or the analysis. So I certainly think there's tremendous risk in using AI to make employment decisions. On the other hand, Oliver, there probably are some opportunities here around using AI to help inform or help an HR professional in this way. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. I do think there are organizations that don't have other systems that can do some of what you're saying, track what they've done in the past. And so there may be opportunity for AI to give you data on that rather than make a decision, really give you that data. Also could help give context around what past practice has been or what other company documents, policies, practices would indicate. So I do think there's some opportunity to leverage AI here, actually making employment decisions. I think that has to really rest with the professionals and rely on the human judgment. Related to that is the hiring decision. And I include this here because a lot of the tools that I'm coming across right now are focused on helping in the talent acquisition space, making that process more efficient. And some of that's about reviewing resumes, using AI to review resumes and then spit out the best ones based on the job description. But I've also seen AI used to conduct interviews. It can display questions that the person answers on video, and then it can ask follow-up questions to whatever the person responds. And so that's another function that I'm seeing. And I think all of this is very risky because that hiring decision and even whether you advance someone's resume to the next stage of the hiring process, there's risk in all of that. That's all part of an employment decision. And so it needs to be very, very careful. And bias is a huge factor in this process. And for those who have looked into kind of resumes, for example, it's very common knowledge, I think, that names on resumes can have a lot of bias. We have seen just changing the name at the top of the resume can change the way it's interpreted. And AI will learn based on some of those practices. So it will not be perfect. And I do have a lot of concern about using these tools in the hiring process. And any opportunities you see there, though, Eli?
Well, I think the bias issue is fascinating, and we're going to dive into that a little bit more as our risk number 3. But in this context, we also have to remember that there is bias in human nature, and that humans, especially if we have folks who are maybe not well trained or don't have the experience in making hiring decisions, that they actually could insert more bias into the process. And actually, a technology tool that's well formulated and well designed and specifically has agents to help address bias, it actually could result in better consistency and accuracy, and could take out some of that human bias that we so much want to avoid. So I think it's an interesting dichotomy, is that while I think there's a lot of risk here in helping employers make responsible decisions around recruiting and hiring, I suspect that there will be AI tools that are fine-tuned to help eliminate some of that risk that humans actually insert into the system.
Yeah. I think it's an area where we should be looking for studies and data where the vendors who are offering to do these things have really looked into what happens when they do things like change names on a resume or change the appearance of someone that the AI is interviewing, and they've proven in their data that there isn't bias, or that they've really improved that component.
Well, and so with that, why don't we talk a little bit more about bias, because it's sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the room is the fact that every AI system seems to have a significant amount of bias integrated into it or built into it. And so let's understand why that is first. And the reason that we are so concerned about bias in AI tools is that as the large language model is trained on all of the volumes and volumes of data, it is trained on data that is human created, that has intrinsic biases, and that already has intrinsic bias or unconscious bias built into it. And so one of the challenges is and if you read up on how these tools have been trained, there's not a lot of focus on how to make sure that these tools are unbiased when they are being trained on all of these volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes of data. And so a lot of the concern is that, and if you think about it, like any human being who has their own lived experience and their own background and their own perspectives, we all come to our jobs and to this day with our own experiences and our own biases, and that is magnified in an artificial intelligence tool. And that's why it's so concerning about how bias may manifest in the outputs that these tools create. For example, this is several months ago now, and but there was an experiment done where an AI tool was asked to describe individuals, including gender, race, age, of individuals in a boardroom who were board members of a large corporation. And pretty consistently, the tools came back and described the board members as middle-aged white men. And that is obviously reflects significant bias. And so that's the type of bias that we're concerned about in large language models. And so if we're delegating responsibility on decision-making or hiring or things like that, and we haven't ensured that the tool is designed to eliminate or mitigate that bias, we could be inserting exactly the bias that we've been working for so many years to try to get out of our decisions as attorneys and HR professionals.
Fully agree, and I hope that everyone has been working to remove those biases. And I think the only counterpoint to this is for those who haven't worked on that, these vendors are working on that. So, I think it goes back to what you said earlier, Eli. It is possible that the AI tools are better than humans. They don't have conscious bias; they have these built-in biases. But I think that's something we need to think deeply about, and hopefully everyone is working on those biases. But I think this is a very important thing to be aware of with AI. One of my fears in reliance on AI is that we really lose our listening skills and ability to hear what's really going on, maybe not the words people are using, but what's really going on under the surface. And I think that is one of my biggest assets as an HR professional is those listening skills. But if we are teaching people to rely on artificial intelligence to listen to conversations, summarize them, even identify the most important issues, I worry that over time, we'll start tuning out. People will start tuning out and won't really hone those listening skills as much. And I think that's one of the most valuable parts of our profession. And I hope that that doesn't happen. But I think there is some risk there.
I think that really plays into our last risk here too. And I think with these two risks, I don't know that there's a lot of opportunity. I think they're really just cautionary tales that we have to be thinking about as we're evaluating how to integrate AI into the HR profession. I think one of the areas, and we've alluded to this a little bit, is just the concern about reducing the reliance in an organization on the true value that HR professionals bring to the table. HR professionals are well trained, they are experienced, and probably the experience that many of you had is more valuable than any training you can give in a week or 5 days. It's really that in the trenches experience dealing with individuals in unique, uncertain situations and using your judgment and critical thinking skills and emotional intelligence to come up with a solid solution to a given employee relations issue. And I think that's one of the concerns is both reducing or suggesting to an organization, to leaders in an organization, that the true value of an HR professional can be replaced in somehow by an AI tool. Another concern is something that Oliver mentioned earlier, which is how do we ensure that the next generation of HR professionals is well trained if we're delegating some of these ministerial tasks to an AI tool and not using those as an entryway to the HR profession. Thoughts on those concerns, Oliver?
Yeah, I have all of those concerns, and I think that that makes it important for us to really start grappling with AI and understanding it and leveraging it in ways that make sense and are lower on the risk profile, but that make us more efficient. Because I think leaders and organizations will demand that we understand AI and that we're able to leverage it. And I hope that that really helps us focus kind of at the top of our license where those HR skills, the listening skills, the judgment skills, where that's really useful and that people still rely on us for that. I think they will if we use AI to be more efficient on the other tasks.
So wrapping it up, let's talk about what does this really mean for HR professionals?
Yeah, well, first of all, don't be left behind. There's a lot going on in this space right now. You're here today, so that's a great start. But keep learning as much as you can about this and play with tools on your personal time. It's fun and there are ways you can build those skill sets. So don't be left behind and get in the game here. Make sure you're staying on top of this area that's rapidly developing. Make sure that you understand the limitations and that when people ask you to implement a tool, you can talk to them about why that might be a challenging idea or even a bad idea. That can include bias or the reliability of the information or even just the adequacy of the output. But make sure you're able to talk through those issues too. Make sure you're using it as a support tool, but not to replace your independent judgment. I think we've talked about that a few times today. And then make sure you're analyzing the various risks. I think I said earlier, work with your legal teams, work with your privacy teams, your IT teams. A lot of them are focused on this right now. So make sure you're bringing in partners to analyze all that risk. And then last but certainly not least, hopefully you heard in much of what we said today, your independent judgment remains very important, even if you're using these tools. So keep that at the forefront, even when implementing AI.
Great. Thank you, Oliver, and thank you for the discussion, all of you. It's great to have comments and questions from you, and pleased to be here. It sounds like you have some opportunities coming up to discuss this more with the HR Acuity and Empower team, so I'll turn it back over to Deb.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great. Obviously timely. I think everybody was sort of leaned into everything you were saying. Of course, for me, every time you mentioned Oliver, I thought Oliver, our ER companion, who's on our platform, would show up. But Oliver, you're on the same wavelength, so you're all Olivers think alike, I guess. So it's great. But thank you. Eli and Oliver's contact information is here. If you want to reach out to them for more information, you should. But we love having them as part of our community. And thank you again to everybody for joining us. And stay tuned for more conversations. We're gonna keep talking about AI for a long time. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thanks so
afternoon.
much.